Okay, I'm honored and privileged to introduce my teacher, Dr. Aaron Smith, who is an instructor and fellow at the Ayn Rand Institute. He's one of the main instructors at the Objectivist Academic Center. He specializes in Greek philosophy. I can personally testify that Dr. Smith is one of the best teachers that I have ever encountered. I've learned a lot from him, especially from my many one-on-one office hour sessions with him. And tomorrow he'll be a main speaker at the Objectivist workshop that we will be having at the Ayn Rand Center in Israel, in Sarona, Tel Aviv. Please welcome Dr. Aaron Smith.
So hello, we're here at a conference that's dedicated toward the theme of liberty, and I assume most of the people who are in attendance would view themselves in one form or other as being pro-liberty, advocates of liberty, in favor of liberty. I don't know that it's exactly true, but I'm acting on that assumption. And so I teach philosophy at the Ayn Rand Institute. I don't know if you've heard of or know much about the philosopher Ayn Rand, but she is... The reason why I wanted to give this talk is because I think she is the philosopher for liberty. I think she is the most important philosopher that can both articulate a view about what liberty amounts to and what it really means in a social political context, and has a philosophic base that is able to defend and support liberty. So Ayn Rand is a radical for liberty. And she does not think of herself as primarily a political philosopher or a political thinker. She's often thought of as people who know of Ayn Rand think of her as she's a defender of capitalism. Right. And that's very common, and she did not at all think of herself in that way. She thought, yeah, sure, I'm a defender of capitalism, of complete unregulated laissez-faire capitalism, for sure. But I only am a defender of that for one reason. And that is because I'm a defender of man's right to live for his own sake. So she's a radical for liberty because she's a moral radical. And I think a moral radical is probably one of the most rare things you can find. Is someone who is willing and able to look at the conventional moral perspective, the kinds of viewpoints that most of us simply take for granted in one form or other, and step back away from those and think, are any of these things actually true? Are the moral principles or the moral rules or the way we think about morality, is that actually true or not? And her view is the conventional morality that many people accept today, the widespread perspective on morality, is poison. And she calls it a morality of altruism, which literally means otherism, where the whole focus of morality, the whole emphasis is on what you do for other people. It's about others. So this is one of the reasons why when you think of a moral ideal, it's hard to think of one other than religious ideals. Like if you think of somebody who's a moral exemplar, a moral saint, if you want to put it that way, whether it's secular or religious, you think of somebody like a Mother Teresa, or you think of somebody like a Jesus on the cross, or something like that, because what do they exemplify? Selflessness, self-sacrifice for the sake of others. And the whole idea is, I'm in Israel, not in a Christian country, but that's where my upbringing was all coming from that background. But the idea is always that you should try to exemplify or emulate that kind of example. Is that so you take just somebody as example today. You take somebody like Bill Gates, who's a tremendously productive businessman, innovator. He makes billions of dollars, and then he's hated, he's stigmatized because why? He keeps his money. He puts his money into his business, he builds new products, he's earning profit, right? Profit motive we all know is suspect. Profit motive we all know is evil. Profit motive is what corrupts things and stuff. But profit means gain, profit means benefit. Profit means you're getting an advantage. You're bringing new value into the world, and you're bringing new value for yourself. So it's the self, the focus on the self, self-interest as the essence of evil. as the essence of what corrupts things, and the focus on others, what you give up for others. Not when you do something for others because you see an advantage to it. You do something for someone you care about. You help, I mean, it's funny because I come out as very, very anti-altruism. I think altruism as a moral perspective is all about self-sacrifice. It's all about giving up things for other people, where you don't gain. And the whole idea behind that is that, in effect, what it tells you is that you don't count. If you do something for yourself, if you achieve something, if you're successful, if you're productive, morally, that doesn't count. If you give it away, that counts. That's when you've done something moral. So the whole perspective, it teaches you to think of the self and the self-interest and benefit and gain and advantage for oneself as that's the bad. And giving it up for others, sacrificing it, that's the good. And I think you couldn't get a worse moral perspective if you tried. Because it tells you that your attitude toward values, think the kinds of things that are important, the kinds of things that you want to act to gain, to keep, to get, to hang on to. It tells you your basic attitude toward values should be to give them up. But what does life require? What does life require?
Reason.
Okay, well, reason. Okay, what else? Values. So life as such is a process, a continuous, self-sustaining process of gaining values and using them. Gaining them and using them so that you can gain them and use them. In other words, so you can keep living. So life is a whole process of gaining values for oneself and using and enjoying them, making use of them. So if you have a moral perspective that tells you your basic attitude toward morality should be to give up for others, give up values for others. I think it's the essence of what contemporary morality is about. Rand's perspective is that's evil. What the good is about identifying the values that actually enrich, sustain, and enhance one's life, and going after them, and getting them, and enjoying them. Now, it's a whole philosophic task. It's not obvious what values you should pursue. It's not obvious by what means you should pursue your values. So that's a serious philosophical endeavor to then think about. I mean, look, this is, my background is largely in ancient Greek philosophy. And what I think is refreshing is to look back to the ancient Greeks and ask, how did they think about morality? And it's, their view is, what is the best life and how to live it? And when you think of the sort of post-ancient Greece, the whole world turns heavily toward religion. And it turns heavily toward there's another world, and there's a being out there that we're supposed to devote ourselves to some other thing. It's some other being that has demands on us that we have to comply or live in obedience with that other being's will. It's not about what you want out of life. It's not what you want to achieve. It's not your happiness. It's subservience, obedience to this divinity's, whatever it is, their commands or expectations and so on. And so I think the major enemy, in Ayn Rand's view, is the major enemy to liberty is this moral perspective. Because Ayn Rand's view is that every individual has the moral right to live for his or her own sake, to live for his own happiness, to identify what the form of happiness is going to take for me in my life, to choose your values and to be able to go after them. And now what stands against that? Like, who believes that? Nobody believes that today. That's virtually absent. How do you put that? Virtually no one thinks that today. Virtually no one thinks you have the right to live for your own sake. Certainly not from a moral perspective. Now, there might be people who say, economically you should be able to trade and the government shouldn't get involved and stuff. But from a moral perspective, because if you really thought that every individual has the moral right to live for his own sake, if you really thought that, what are the implications? You're born into the world with no duties to others. Duty is out. The existence of moral duties that simply just stand above you. It's not about responsibilities that you take on. Right? If I take a job and I agree I need to do this because I'm getting paid, and that's an agreement one voluntarily takes on, and you do have an obligation to that. You've committed to that. But the idea that you're born into the world with no standing obligations that hang over you that you have to just sort of fulfill. So duty's out. I mean, she thinks, frankly, if you think about morality in terms of adherence to duty, you haven't discovered morality yet. You haven't found out what the field of morality is and what it's about, because it's about value pursuit, and it's about the methods of value pursuit. But can society demand that you sacrifice your own life, your own goals, your own time, your own resources for the rest of us? Can society demand that if you have the moral right to live for your own sake? No. Well, now we're getting radical, because it's getting radical though. Because then what does that eliminate? It eliminates the whole perspective, the whole collectivist perspective of the welfare state, which most of us live in. I mean, Europe's basically all welfare states. The U.S. certainly is, unfortunately. So we all live in welfare states because we accept that morality of altruism, where it's widespread in the culture. Because the whole idea is, if someone needs something, right, that creates a moral duty, a moral obligation for the rest of us to fulfill that need. That's altruism. Well, what about you? Look, I've got my own. What about I have my own goals? What about I have my own goals for my resources. I don't want to have them diverted against my will to go to here and here and here. Well, who cares? I mean, the perspective is that doesn't matter. You don't count. Your goals don't count. What you want out of life doesn't count. You owe the community, in some sense. And so I think that when you think about Ayn Rand as an important figure in sort of the defense of liberty, I think it's the most important to think of her not so much as an advocate of capitalism, which she is, and importantly, but she's an advocate for a new perspective on morality. And she's rejecting the conventional morality that tells you that your obligation in morality, your obligation is to others. It's to the community, it's to society, however you want to put it, the state, the nation, whichever. But it's to some other, to some group. And her own alternative to this is what she calls a morality of rational egoism. So egoism is self-interest, right? It's a moral perspective that says your own life should be your ultimate object of concern. And I always have to hasten to jump in. I think this is obvious, but because the widespread confusions that altruism engenders, is that doesn't rule out caring about other people. I mean, this is just obvious, I suppose, but it's sort of, I mean, do other people matter to you in life? Yes. Friends, people you love, like intelligent coworkers, right? There's all sorts of ways in which other people are a tremendous value for your own life, but it has to be on your own terms, and you have to be able to go your own way. So our view is that you need to live your life by reason. This is not by faith, not by authority, not by simply blindly following the crowd. You use your mind. You have to identify which values actually sustain and promote your life. And you have to go out after them, and you have to find the right methods to function in life so that you achieve those successfully. Those methods she calls virtues. So you'll find her advocating rationality is the principal virtue in her ethics. Because why? Well, then we dig one step down deeper into her philosophy. Her view is that reason is your primary means of knowledge. There isn't any other. I don't know why I said primary. Reason is your basic means of knowledge, and it's your basic means of identifying what values support life. And it's your tool of survival, and as a result, it's your tool of survival. So we're not born with instincts. We don't come into the world knowing how to live. We don't come into the world knowing what values to pursue or how to conduct ourselves. Or why live this way versus that way. We're not born knowing that. Okay, we have a little suckling reflex, and one or two other little minor reflexes, that's it. And the rest is all a matter about knowledge, gaining more and more knowledge to know what actually supports your life, and then figuring out the methods to actually attain that. She regards that as a moral pursuit, to figure out what those things are. But altruism has pushed all of that to the one side and says, yeah, I mean, okay, fine, you gotta live, you gotta, don't walk in front of a bus, and I suppose you gotta get a job or something, because for reality sort of demands it of you in some form. But that's not a moral issue. See, morality is all about what you do for others, so it's sort of severed off the pursuit of happiness, the pursuit of life, the maintenance and sustenance of life. It's put that to one side. There are the practical issues. But it's treated morality, the good, the ideal, all on the side of doing things for others. And it's split man in two. It's severed the pursuit of life and happiness. That goes one way from the pursuit of the good and the moral. And that cuts the other way. Because the good and the moral says, give up for others. And life and happiness and values, it says, No, no, find values, gain them, and keep them. So I think the right way to think about Ayn Rand is she's a moral revolutionary in that regard, throwing off a long-standing moral perspective and offering a new one. And what does this have to do with liberty? If you don't accept and don't hold or know how to defend the view that every individual has the moral right to live his life for his own sake, you can't defend liberty. Because once you give that up, just all bets are off. Okay, so because then you don't have the moral right to live for your own sake? Because what? Well, because you'll have duties to others. Okay. So which duties do I have to others and what? Well, we'll tell you. And that's the way it always functions. So, well, we'll start about with 10% income tax, then it's 15, then it's 20, then it's 30. Why not 99? Wow, it's kind of hard to put that one over. Yeah, but there's no moral principle that would say, that's wrong, that's evil. You can't do this with people's life. For Christ's sake, they're not yours to throw away. Well, that's what morality has taught you to think, right? Not you, hey, present company exempted. But the idea is that this is widespread in the culture. There's no moral principle, I think, that people could cite to say, you have to draw the line somewhere. 10% is okay, 15, that's out. Or 0, Ayn Rand's perspective would be 0% is what's moral. But there's no way to draw the line anymore. What if you don't accept that you have the right to live for your own sake? And I think that's the major reason why many defenders of liberty aren't fully able to stand up for liberty. Because if and to the extent they accept the view of the moral perspective of altruism, that you have duties to society, to other people, that need somehow stands above rights, that need stands above your own pursuit of happiness, that need stands above your life. There will always be demands on your life, moral demands. And that means if you don't fulfill them, you're in the wrong morally. And so I think one of the major things I think defenders of liberty need to do, I think they need to spend more time with Ayn Rand. And if they don't know much about her, I think they should spend the time to investigate. I think she has a ton to offer. And I mean, I have a PhD in philosophy, so I've spent a lot of time in grad school, and too long in grad school, but a lot of time with contemporary philosophy and reading what they do, and she's a very, very different kind of thinker. And one that really bears, I think, further investigation, particularly if you want to defend liberty. So let me just pause there. I threw a lot at you, and we can take questions. Yes, sir.
You said that philanthropy, you can't force it on people, but I think that you're looking at it from the wrong perspective, because if you're a philanthropist, you do it because you want to enforce your values and you gain from it, but seeing how your money changes others people's lives. So you do it for your own good. It's not for, it doesn't have to be like for the good of others. You do it because it does good for you.
I would say two things about that. One, I think philanthropy can be rational, and it can be in your interests. And it just takes something like, so I work for an organization that is funded entirely by donations. So it's a nonprofit. And so we say these are the kinds of values, this is what we're working for, these are the kind of programs we have, these are the things we're championing. If you want to support this, this is what we do. And we're funded entirely by donations. And I think that's a rational pursuit. You're putting your money, your resources where your values are. And you can see that as, this is enhancing my life, this is upholding actual values, things I think are rationally valuable for me in my life. But I would say that's one kind of thing. So there's nothing against philanthropy. But there's another kind of perspective that you can have on philanthropy, which Ayn Rand certainly does not agree with, and I don't agree with either. It's that if it makes you feel good, yeah, do it. But you could say that about anything. I think kick Jonathan. If it makes you feel good, do it. It's like, well, no, that's not a moral standard for anything. You smoke crack if it makes you feel good, right? So an emotion or just anything, any kind of thing, if it makes you feel good isn't a moral justification. And I think a lot of people that turn to philanthropy, and it's not everybody, but a lot of people that turn to it, is they do it because they're taught to think that this is what's moral, and they want to be moral people. Don't you want to be a moral person? I do. Right?
I
I mean, so what?
I don't know.
Yeah,
If I
right.
want to be moral, I will be moral, but if I don't want to.
Well, no one can make you be moral in the sense, like as an individual. No one can, but also it's, what does it mean to be moral? I think is an important question to ask, because if somebody says, don't you want to be moral? And my parents hand me, Christ on the cross, it's like, the hell no. If that's what morality amounts to, I'm out. But then people do that too, which is sad, because then people turn to an amoral sort of existence, because they don't really know, they haven't been offered a rational alternative to say this is what a positive, rational morality that's actually in your interest looks like, and that's what Ayn Rand is offering. So philanthropy can be in your interest. I think it's often done for altruistic reasons, but it need not be. Yeah.
So what if I am pursuing my own interest, which is moral, and this has caused millions of people to die? So is this
To
still moral?
die?
To die. I need to push a button. If I push, I live, and millions will die. Just.
Well, I think when you think about the kinds of approaches to life and the kind of values to pursue, which are actually in your interest, in that you think about your life long range. If you make up a science fiction example,
Yeah.
you can't form a morality on that. So it's similar to, like, if I'm all in a lifeboat and I have to shove you guys all off to survive, what moral principle should I live by? None. You can't formulate a moral view of life, because you can't formulate a moral view of life in that context. You have to formulate a moral perspective on life in the sort of normal case where people can actually function and live.
Well, in science, you take the extreme to see what applies there, and according to this, what's the principle?
Well, the principle is you can't start with a fantasy and work backward to reality. Because if it's, because this is common in philosophy, is that, and if you're from a scientific background, it's like we look for a counterexample. We take something, and this is often in philosophy as well. But often the counterexamples are completely detached from life. I mean, if you can't really think about an example where in actual life that you would need to push a button and wipe out everybody to save your life, I mean, if that were to, I mean, nobody could live, and you wouldn't even need to have to formulate a moral perspective. There'd be no interrelationships with other people. You couldn't have a long-range perspective on your life. You wouldn't need to map out the kinds of methods of functioning and the values that you need to pursue. It would be irrelevant. It's like taking a lifeboat situation and say, well, what's a moral view of life? It's like, well, you're about to die, and the only way you can do it is to kick other people off. But then you can't formulate a moral perspective from that foundation. There's a question is, once you have formulated a view about what morality, a moral life really looks like, and then you can say, well, how would morality apply in these sort of edge cases, which will probably never happen, but it is an edge case, what would you do? And I think in the sort of lifeboat condition, I don't think those same moral principles apply, because the context in which we need those moral principles is no longer there. So, yeah.
Short comment in the question. About your example about Bill Gates.
Yeah.
Well, he's invested a lot in philanthropy for his image, and also people see him in a negative light, not necessarily because of the amount of money, but because of his politics, because of corruption, because of other stuff. Just a comment. And the question about, you said it's extreme, like we come to an extreme with this philosophy. You said something about it being an extreme. And also, if we look at the psychology of the developmental psychology of humans, let's say children, they're very egoistic by nature. So human beings, maybe the baseline, we're basically egoistic creatures. So maybe if we don't get the education to be more caring and more compassionate, the question is, will society be too egoistic, like not enough cooperation? So maybe I can see the point of view of Rand, and I don't say it's a bad point of view, but maybe it's a little too extreme. Maybe the point of view right now in society is too extreme to the left, and maybe Rand's is too extreme to the right. So maybe we can find some middle ground.
Okay, let me comment on two of the aspects of that. We can set Bill Gates to one side, because anytime you have an individual, Steve Jobs, whoever it is, they're going to be mixed cases. Some people will hate him for this reason versus that reason. But when I think of a figure that has a cultural importance, I think there is partly because there's such an anti-profit, anti-billionaire. All politicians have to do is take Obama's a great millionaires and billionaires. All he has to do is say that, and it activates the whole context of resentment and hatred, that sort of tribe against tribe stuff, and he can activate that. He can't activate. Yeah, look how amazing a productive business. They don't care about the selfish. So children, I think, are naturally self-oriented because they're living organisms, and they better be, because their life requires it. But I wouldn't say that they're egoistic in the sense that, so egoism is a moral philosophy. It's a moral philosophy that places one's own life as one's own ultimate value. And they don't know much about values. They don't know what other things, they don't know what they're doing. So I wouldn't put them as egoists, but I take the point, is that they're self-oriented. But they don't yet have enough knowledge to know what's actually in their interest. So that's why you have to, honey, no, we're not going to eat that. You have to keep pulling them back from things. Oh, that's pleasurable. But that's not necessarily what's good for you. So I take it to be an egoist as someone who thinks their own life is their own ultimate value. And then that leaves open different perspectives on egoism, like to think of what values should I pursue? What does it mean to pursue my own life as an ultimate value? And you can have different theories, and Rand's is one of those. The thing about too extreme, maybe we needed compassion. That comes from the implication there is that compassion is at odds with self-interest, and I don't think it is. Compassion is, I don't know how you define compassion, but compassion is a certain kind of sympathy that one has for someone else. But she thinks that, Aina thinks that compassion is valuable and appropriate for people who are suffering under injustice, people who don't deserve the kinds of things that they get. But our culture teaches us to have compassion for anybody. Anybody who's suffering, anybody who's in need, regardless of why they're there. Are they completely irrational? Are they there because they're lazy versus there because it's no fault of their own and stuff? And so compassion is a normal aspect. But she thinks it can't be the centerpiece of your morality. Because first you have to think about what does life actually require? And then you have to go get it. Compassion is a side issue. And it's an emotional response to things. It's not like guidance. If I feel compassion for someone, so what should I do? Well, it doesn't tell you what to do. It's an emotion. I can feel compassion for somebody and then think, well, should I help them out? Should I do something? Should I just give them moral support? Or should I do something? Well, and then that depends on, well, what are all my other values? Like, how does this fit in? How important is this to me? And this sort of altruistic culture teaches us to think, why are you thinking that way? That now you're thinking, how is this good for me? How does this fit into my values? How selfish is that? If you have compassion for someone and you just do something. Yes, sir.
My question is, I know that there's certain events where you jump into the river to save someone's life and risking your life without thinking. It's not moral value decision. It's not that you think about. You just do it. Not everybody, but some people will jump, some people will freeze, some people will run away. So it's not this challenging that we are not egoist, that we are not selfish people, that we think about like living in individuals of part of society, that we are really, where I remember being a kid and jumping to the river to save someone, and at the end I almost killed myself just to try to save it. But I didn't think about that, and I don't think I was enough educated to know that this is something moral. I just did it.
Yeah, and I think the thing is that the response that you had is probably not coming, as you said, it's probably not coming from some moral philosophy, some view. I think it comes from something that's actually valuable. I think it comes from so I think in some sense, I think self-interest is at the heart of that, but it's psychological. Because once you come to understand what it means to live, like you have your own life, what it means to live, what it means to suffer, what it means to have joy, what it means to want to hang on to life, I think that gives you a certain perspective on other people's lives. And if you just see someone they're drowning or something, often for many people the first response will be to try to do something. But then again, it depends on the context. How much risk are you putting yourself? How much risk are you putting yourself into? And I think it's important to think about that. So if it's my wife that goes into the water, that's
someone you
different.
don't know. I think that's where I think that the basic idea of Ayn Rand is like something is not there, because there are many events in life that certain kind of people will react, not selfish or not egoistic, whatever word you use. I mean, they will try to save.
Yeah, I don't, but again, those,
like
kinds,
something
yeah, those kinds of
transcendental.
emergency actions, I think it's often the case that people react unthinkingly. And so you can't really put it as, is this sort of an altruistic act, is this an egoistic act?
But it's
Yeah.
not unthinkingly, because people have education, and it's their education that leads them to do whatever they tend to do in this situation.
It can, but then as if you're thinking from the perspective of philosophy, or you're thinking about the perspective of morality, you have to step back from these kinds of kind of knee-jerk, quick reactions and think, yeah, but what should the person be doing? The fact that some people might do that, and the fact that some people might have a positive response to that, it's still like, yeah, but what is that in your interest? Is it good that you're doing it? And you could have different answers to that, but it could be just because I think the answer is, I don't think you should put your life. I mean, your life is your own highest value, and I think you shouldn't put that value at risk lightly. If my wife goes into the water, I'm going to go in because I mean she's my highest value, and so it's like I couldn't function. I couldn't live with my life if I had done that, and that's in the service of my life and what I wanted to be and what I wanted to shape up with. And I'm not throwing my life away. I'm risking, and that's different. Yeah. I guess.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. Yeah.